Good evening. Thanks very much for coming. A very select audience tonight for the second talk in a series of three. Now, this series of talks, not lectures, are being held by courtesy of the management of BPP Law School. And then thanks for coming. And the aim of it is try to explain to the average punter on the street where we're going in certain arms of policy, except the average punters in the street, in the audience, know quite a lot about dementia policy anyway, as it happens on this particular night. So I'll try to make it as reasonable as possible, given the wealth of knowledge in the audience. Now, the aim of this particular talk, which I'll aim to do in about 45-50 minutes, is choice in the English dementia strategy. Note English, not Scottish or Welsh or United Nations. It's English. Human rights or budgets. There's been quite a long saga about this particular drift in policy, and in fact there is overall political unanimity about it, which can be reassuring or shocking depending on your perspective. I would like to begin with this fallback with, in fact, this document, which is yet to be updated next year. This is the English Dementia Strategy, which rightfully receives a groan from the audience. And this is the one of the latter versions, 2012 now. We moved forward 3 years. Now the Prime Minister's Dementia Challenge of 2012. And we moved forward a bit further, and this came out a few months ago. The Prime Minister's Challenge, same Prime Minister, happily or sadly, depending on your viewpoint, going forward to 2020. So this was in 2015. So you see a trend here, similar wine, different bottles, 2009, 2012, 2015. In other words, England is blessed by having a national strategy every year, and virtually, and we've got to try to make some of it work at some stage. So here we go, personal budgets. Now, there's a lot of stuff and guff written about budgets. Everything seems to be a household budget, including the national economy, even though that's not true, because unlike national economies, we can't print money, etc. But the issue about personal budgets is that they run the profit, loss, surplus or not surplus, deficit. You're meant to ideally be able to forecast your budget, seeing whether you're spending too much on a rolling basis, or maybe you can really predict what will happen in the future. Anyway, the idea has been a rather convoluted one, and personalization, spelled there with an S. If you were to read the American journals, you'd find it spelled with a Z. If you're Googling this sort of stuff, has been a major aim of English social care policy for over a decade, and has enjoyed the broad support of all political parties. By this I mean the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems. I'm unaware of the policies of the Greens, UKIP or others on this particular policy. And the aim was and it was a good aim, and most of us agree, whatever the outcome of this particular policy drive, it was actually a good aim to actually tailor the service more to the needs and wants, and the terms aren't interchangeable, but I will use them interchangeably for this sentence, needs and wants of service users, embracing the idea that one size does not fit all. So, stacks written about it, and I'm not going to go into the stuff, but the memes you will hear regularly are choice, control, flexibility. There's a citation from Melanie Henwood and Professor Bob Hudson in Durham, and included with this promotion of well-being, which happens to be Section 1 of the Character Part 1, 2014, and independence. And it's been commented elsewhere, this uptake has been notoriously slow, is a buzzword, and in fact, still managed to make national legislation in the character, notwithstanding, mainly thanks to the work of Paul Burstow, who will be a familiar name to many of you for various reasons. There have been a number of drivers to personalise healthcare in England. One is broad integration, however so defined, buzzword, means lots of things to many people. Integration of health and social care. There's been a rather offensive idea that the social care service should bail out the NHS of difficulties, but they have not had protected funding since 2010 themselves. And the idea that this type of approach is best suited to long-term conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, dementia, SLE, mental health conditions, schizophrenia, and the list goes on. And the idea that many people aren't best off in hospital, are best off at home or another other care setting like a care home, residential home, nursing home, or even hospice. I don't mean even, or hospice. And the idea that this armed policy offers all the things we've spoken about: choice, control, flexibility. And this is the easy read version of all about personal health budgets. Now, I emphasize easy read because I have done surveys on what people actually understand by personal budgets, and actually the understanding of what a personal budget is extremely poor in the general population. So I'm not going to labour this point. It'll be pretty known to many people. It can either be a national budget, maybe held by a local authority, or a real budget held by a third party, rather disparagingly called by people on the left like me a broker, meaning this third party invisible guy you never seen who commissions all the money on your behalf. Or the third person is that they actually give you what your money. Here's the money, guys, do what you want with it. So those overall are the approaches, and you won't be surprised here. There's all sorts of stuff that may in future be thought to prevent dementia. There's been some stuff today from the American Geriatrics Association on how exercise is good for you if you happen to be old. Now, it could be pardon me, the same sort of stuff for dementia. Exercise difficulty, dementia is not just about older people, but it does increase in risk as you get older. Therefore, one worries about older people with osteoporosis and frailty and how much are able to take all the strenuous exercise, etc. Anyway, coconut oil is something you can dip on your head without any effort, and maybe there's something there, maybe there isn't. Honey. Now, as it happens, I take Manuka honey from asthma, which you'll see has been working particularly well for my dry hacking cough. Now, this also has been subject to some work, believe it or not, at the bum end of research compared to monoclonal antibodies for amyloid plaques in dementia, which commands far more kudos. But anyway, here it goes. Shavalambus et al. Looked at head and neck radiotherapy adjunctive use of honey compared to on inflammation of the mucosa. And you notice I'm not reporting the results of these trials. You can look them up yourself. And Hardari et al. 2013 could improve healing after a cesarean. And so it goes. Nick Mays in 2013. This is the official version of the government really effectively commissioned reports, and guess what? The government found a positive result in 2013. This is the official spiel for how they. If you give somebody water money, there is a element of improvement well-being to be expected, but notwithstanding that, that you can read the reports by Glendinning, and there's a load of them on the internet, which you can look up on the government reports of the efficacy of personal health budgets. And there's been a diatribe of criticism too that you should be aware of. Now, the issue about what happens if you get this third party broker in? Well, it can create a lot of mayhem. For people of certain tendency like me, will refer to how they'll be involving certain other people. Lots of reduplication, lots of fragmentation, lots of people doing the same job for no reason. And here you have the rather typical list of the cost of implementing personal budgets, which includes costs of product management, science, workforce training, managing the market, however so defined, ongoing costs, displacement of other, and so it goes on. Another long-winded list, which does in fact add to the total bill. Yeah, and Rogers, look at this business about complementary therapy. And this has been a drive since the 80s. And I'm pretty happy about this because I don't think a lot of the conventional medical therapies are as good as sometimes made out. They're extremely successfully marketed. But notwithstanding, there's been a tendency to want the evidence. Commissioners want to see evidence. Many complementary therapies are not supported by the evidence, but they are popular. And if public policy were not driven by choice, then would the drive towards evidence be so rampant? Probably not. So, anyway, definitions Gatsby, February 2013, personalisation is defined by central government, the state, inverted commas, as the process by which services are tailored to the needs and preferences of citizens. The overall vision is that the state should empower, engage, all these buzzwords, citizens to engage their own lives and the services they received from the Cabinet Office. And here's something about the resource allocation system. It sounds a bit voodoo, sounds a bit high-powered. It's a thing which sorts out who's going to get what money. And general criticism has been underfunded. And many people find the whole business overwhelming. Anyone who's had any involvement with England's benefit system will find the whole thing overwhelming. So this is nothing new, particularly in Salisbury, Beresford and Schofield. Reporting the history of this, I don't want to tread on policy eggshells here, but there are some, and I want to keep out of them. And there's been a general drift, by the way, to not going to upfront personal payments. And this is really interesting, how this is. I'm going to come on to that. But the government's official policy line, and government is different from the last one, as we are aware in some ways. The allocation of clear, upfront, indicative or ballpark allocation at the start of the planning process will help people to develop a plan and make appropriate choices over how their needs are met. Now, that was meant to be the party line. However, the CARE Act itself defines a personal budget in quite a different way, making no reference to an upfront allocation payment, which is actually quite interesting. If you are legally trained, looking at the way in which government lawyers have drafted this, that makes no mention of upfront payments, and it's Section 26 if we want to have a butcher's at it later. So, the guidance for CARE Act, as reviewed Salisbury, Beresford and Schofield, cites care at governance, asserting independent research which shows that where implemented well, personal budgets can improve outcomes and deliver better value for money, which of course is a very new Labour Conservative thing of reforming public services so that they're better value for money and blah blah blah. We've seen it all before, and except as Peter Beresford and colleagues point out, the evidence actually is nowhere near pointing in this direction. The Glendinning study, which is actually one of the government pilot write-ups, doesn't show that really, nor does improving value for money, one can argue, nor does the financial management or personal budgets, audit commission, or the users of social care personal budget, IPOS or MORI. So rather flaky evidence for this upfront payment, which emphasizes the distinction between policy-based evidence and evidence-based policy. So here is yet another document: how do managers and leaders feel about involvement in mental health services in traditional and emerging forms. And the upshot was there's likely to be a social movement of service users, and managers ought to be mindful of this. It's a social movement, another one of these buzzwords associated with complex organisational change, which this indeed is. Now, Richard Humphreys of the King's Fund has signposted where this all fits in, which is, of course, integration. And given that I'll be giving a talk on integration in August, I don't really want to give too much away in that I haven't prepared it yet. But here's point number one: aging population. Often, this requires, pardon the hyphen, often requires people to have care at home rather than include any MAUs, etc. Fragmentation. Many people thought Section 75 would turbo boost outsourcing of particular services, which it has done. Simon Stevens disagrees. Enough said. And third thing, history, silos, inbuilt, entrenched, and here's the problem. There's one arm of the system which is universal, it's claimed, although bits of it are being increasingly rationed, and the Her Majesty's government recently have asked for an inquiry into top-ups and all this pay-ups and all the rest of it, add-ons, to try to fund their interests elsewhere. But the other part of it, social care, which has been increasingly privatised and is subject to the means test. Now, but the general perception is the market in social care has failed. Now, if you think that this is as hyperbolic as some of the statements made about monoclonal antibodies against amyloid, then probably you're wrong, because yesterday's statements were awful for those of us who have been looking at their data. But anyway, Buck report, which was the King's Fund baby looking at integrational health and social care, found the whole thing rather opaque, inefficient, inequitable, and weighted towards individual rather than collective responsibility. And news reports also saying the same thing, nominal change. Lessons we learn from the Netherlands with suitably Dutch names apart from Martin McKee's down the road at the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, or whatever it's called. Eligibility criteria ought to be clear. Administrative rules ought to be clear, and adequate support should be given. In the BMJ, this is all mothered and apple pie, all fairly sensible stuff. But there's been quite a lot of reports about this, about fraud. Now, I don't want to over-egg the fraud pudding. And certainly, if you talk to personal experiences of people who use personal budgets, that it's really been a positive one. So there is, you view this attack regarding fraud with some caution. There may be some thing to it, or there may not be. But the issue is that if you have private markets which aren't disclosing themselves properly, transparent, a bit opaque, is susceptible to information balances, fraud, etc. But fraud is a very heavily loaded word in the criminal law. You have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah, so in fact, I've got a book calling Better with Dementia. That's the only plug there'll be for that book. But there's a long list of various barriers to implementation, personal budgets, or self-directed control. I want to just mention self-directed control support is not the same as personal budgets. It's a term tending to be preferentially used in Scotland, and its definition really refers to the increased choice you get from giving the service user a chance to develop their own means, like budgets, third party, etc. But in theory, self-directed support does not only include budgets. And there's a whole list of reasons why uptake may be slow. As you'll be aware, the critical test for any innovation is its adoption. And if you have problems like lack of knowledge, not yet fully adapted, local authority getting anxious, challenging financial climate, lack of information, then you can see this tending to be a bit of a mess. Lack of addressing care supports, local markets which aren't developed. That's been a rather polite way of saying the products are shit, or, pardon my language, the services are not very good. There's no point offering choice of 400 bad products, as some of us will sympathise with if we're looking into alternative TV channels. Inefficient overall levels of funding in the system. True, well, there's a bad brief from the current government, a comprehensive spending review, and one can anticipate social care will not be a great beneficiary of this, but everyone innocent and proven guilty will wait to see. Silos and mechanisms for direct payments for people who lack capacity. I'm not going to gloss on that point. The point is actually very important. In my view, and I'm not alone, the mental capacity legislation is better than nothing. It serves a function, could be improved. A lot of stuff written on it in its implementation. It does fundamentally conflict with human rights. Take this thought that you cannot discriminate against somebody on the basis of their mental cognitive powers. Capacity is defined in the law very clearly about decision making, but you should never discriminate against somebody because they're living with dementia, and some of the worst offenders are indeed medical professionals, and they shouldn't do this. So, barriers to implementation, risk aversion, yeah. Overcomplicated regulation, fine. Concerns about doing criminal records, well, many in the public will say a good thing too. Seb Beresford in 2009 added to this list in a helpful way. Said, what about people with fluctuating and deteriorating, or shouldn't be and really, or deteriorating conditions? I'm mindful of Lewy body dementia, which can have a very fluctuating time course, and indeed, if you don't have Lewy body dementia, often a person living with dementia will say they have good and bad days. Well, obviously, the timing of these good and bad days in relation to assessment is quite important. How will flexibility be ensured? Well, flexibility is the easy word to use, but the actual proof of the pudding is hard. What limits will be governed about? Should we allow money to be spent on iPads? If it's argued that whatever that game is, Crazy Birds, it's good for your cognition, should this be openly advocated for people with dementia? That sort of question. This sort of Daily Mail is best question. What would be included? The sort of knife edge, cliffhanger policy element of some things will be in, some things will be out, and what's in or out is anyone's guess. But on a good note, it challenges the conventional power dynamics. I'm all for that, in fact. Yeah, I really am. I wouldn't say any more than that. It could be that it might help people with disabilities more. There's some evidence for that. But what is caveat that maybe the carers get a bad deal? Hard to say. Carers and people with dementia, for example, do not necessarily have the same views. Definitely want to watch. We need more research. Yeah, I only put this paper up, which you can't read, admittedly, by Professor Manes from Argentina, which says there's different types of decision-making profiles in people with conditions like motor neuron disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, and all the rest of it. But the thing is, all these distinct profiles of memory, attention, spatial span, perception, decision-making, they're all so uniquely variable, even in Parkinson's, Huntington's, that you'll see this capacity issue is very sort of real sledgehammer approach, because these profiles are very subtle sometimes, and I only talk about this in relation to the idea of persons with dementia being responsible for their own budget, because some of them will be not being pejorative, some of them would be very impulsive. Now, you can argue whether such people should be safeguarded against for not being in charge of a budget. A difficult question which nobody wants to even bring up, let alone answer. But capacity also suffers from an all or nothing phenomenon. But in theory, you're meant to review capacity. Many people do, many people don't. But that's not to talk about capacity. Just before I go on to the human rights issues, the increasing use of stuff coming out of the NHS on these smartphones, diagnosed by a smartphone, the new Jerusalem of the National Health Service, Olive Wyman's stuff seemed to somehow mysteriously make itself into make an appearance in some form in Jeremy Hunt's speech the other day. May be connected, may not be connected. I don't know. But anyway, the idea that information can be a good thing, be mindful, it can create problems as well. If you happen to know your genetic makeup before you're born, this, in theory, can be a cause of discrimination against you. The Americans are well aware of this. I've discussed it in the book, Second Plug, Apologise, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And I'm sure when US sees it will catch a cold. And so watch us. Demos, if you're wondering who are Demos, well, they have a think tank. I think they claim, like us, to be independent, but they have argued the use of smart cards for payments, and some would argue this is zombie policy. Lord Desai is not a zombie, but he's in fact a Labour peer, and he argued this the other week in the House of Lords. So this sort of top-up payment stuff is sort of, he says some form, no doubt after the Labour leadership election, they can all look over the policy corpse to wonder whether they progress with this or not. So I'm going to come on to something which I think, in fairness, I'm interested in much more. And I just want to quote Peter Watt, who said, "Change here is probably not going to emerge from a committee." Now, there are lots of committees, and you think, well, the change that was achieved in racism was not achieved by a committee. It was achieved by this man, in part. Or another jurisdiction. Canty didn't spend his days in and out of committees. I think that's true. I would be very surprised if he did. Ken Swaffer, not really a committee person either, but our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Yeah, and there's a general feeling that some people are keeping silent over the things which does matter quite a lot. Now, in fact, some people do not wish to keep silent, refuse to be silenced, as indeed this person on Westminster Bridge did the other day when the Independent Living Fund was being shut down. So here's the basis of legal human rights. Rights are not just legal, they're moral too. Look at apartheid. They're meant to be lawful. Well, that's difficult for lawyers who have to decide what's lawful or not. It tends to become a case of if it's not in the law, it's not important. Not true. The law does evolve. It's meant to be necessary and proportionate, be least restrictive, not be a sledgehammer approach, has to be proactive, and the usual thing, call to action. Now, I'd like to say something on human rights, particularly in relation to current policy, which is that there's a lot of stigma against people with dementia and people whose cognition is compromised, and we should be embracing thought diversity. In other words, people can do things which they are best suited to. I can barely walk, let alone run. Therefore, one wouldn't want me doing a job which would require the 100 meters, etc. Maybe some other type of job would be more suitable. And it's often the case that people with I'm loath to use the word stages of dementia, but people who've had dementia, maybe, and it's going fast in terms of their own experience of it, and can infringe on personhood and human rights. And this idea, I've heard it from CCG commissioners. They have dementia, they lack capacity. No, can you please separate these two parts of the same sentence? Please get that correct. You're meant to be in charge of policy implementation. Please do not make offensive statements like that. Read a book or something on dementia. So, the Blackie Group of Dementia Alliance International locked up in Sydney. No, in Perth this year. They'll be going next year to Budapest. And the various forms of guidance, the nice guidance, Quality Standard 30, if you're interested, has a number of statements which promote decision-making and, as it happens, advocacy. Now, one of the victims, if that's not too strong a word, of the Prime Minister's Dementia Challenge has been the annihilation, that's maybe a strong word too, of advocacy services, legal aid, etc. If you're talking about dementia-friendly communities, it's impossible to argue friendly communities if you have infrastructure being macheted to bits elsewhere, like the legal infrastructure. Anyway, enough about that particular problem and the usual buzzwords about enable, participate, empowerment, involve. But these are really important issues. Watching, for instance, deep empowerment and involvement, engagement of people with dementia, very important initiative, and still one of the current issues which I've discussed with Steve Milton, for example, is one of the gurus there, is there's currently going to be new nice guidance for dementia, which is being revised. I'd love to see some people actually involved in dementia care actually on this committee, and maybe if you would like to look up the application process, I would strongly advise you to do so quickly and get into a receive if you can. So here we have Kate's a distinction between the medical model and the disability model, social model of care. The idea that nothing can be done drives most of us nuts. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said, cure, brilliant, that's brilliant. Who doesn't want to cure? And I think we all agree, who doesn't want to cure? You'd have to be very mean-minded not to want to have a cure. But there are 47 million people living with dementia at the moment, and whilst the cure may not be meeting on that, also maybe a way of improving their lives is through reablement or rehabilitation. I strongly advise you to prescribe disengagement. Case offers a model, quite a lot to it. I don't want to do it an injustice by glossing over it here. And here's the thing I mentioned had been shut down. Well, the government said, well, this is a case of more appropriate use of resources in the right place, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, money will be available magically, will be made available magically elsewhere, probably. But anyway, it's been shut down. That had been established in the 1980s as a source of funds for people with disability, and its take-up was high. And John Evans argued we can't give up on independent living before it's shut down. And disability is important in relation to dementia too. Not people look really obviously disabled. Some people live with invisible disabilities. This instrument I've spoken about before, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And these are sorts of things you would want from a dementia-friendly community. Note, for example, Article 13, access to justice. Well, the last government enacted legal aid and sentencing punishment of Offenders Act, which killed off legal aid, some would say. So, anyway, there you go. There's Article 29, regulation and participation in political life. Well, how many people do you see living with dementia who are democratically elected onto bodies? Not many, none. So that's something which needs to be addressed. Now, this was a document which came out of the House of Lords about learning difficulties. I'd like to go on to it later, if I may, because currently in England, the government's in process of scrapping the Human Rights Act as part of progressive aspiration in Britain. But it turns out that we're still signatories of the European Convention on Human Rights. Not much coming out of David Cameron's mouth as to whether we leave this too. One guesses we won't. And most lawyers don't expect us to leave either. Article 8, I would like to flag this up as the right to respect for family and private life. Everyone has the right to respect for his family, private and family life, his home and correspondence. Respect for family life. That many, I don't want to go into talk about the use of the term unpaid carers, tend to be husbands, wives, sons, daughters, family members who are never given any training for this particular vocation, and they want to be with their partners when they get admitted to the hospital. And if you read through the literature, many carers, shorthand, do find it very unsettling that complete strangers suddenly take over the care of their loved ones at the drop of a hat. I would like to say overnight. That brings me on to John's complaint, Nicky Gerard and colleagues. I think it's an infringement of Article 8. There's never been a legal case on it, but anyway, there you go. And not just unique to England, Ireland have rights too, as one would hope, and Ireland proved some progressiveness themselves with the LBGT referendum to inequality. Here are some principles that you can find them cited particularly in Scotland, and by who? Panel principles, which are as follows: participation in decisions which affect people's human rights. P. A. Accountability to those responsible for their respect, protection and fulfilment of human rights. N. Non-discrimination and equality. Human rights are universal. Note universal. Everyone has the right to human rights. Everyone does not have a right to a personal budget. I can't have a personal budget sometimes because there's not enough money. Empowerment to know what their rights are and how to claim them. No good not knowing what the rights are or not knowing how they can be enforced. They can be enforced, for example, through the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Not many people know that, but maybe we should get the word out. And legality in all decisions. And I don't want to go into the list, but there's a long list of pieces of human rights. And I thought of some today as I was looking thin air, things like covert surveillance. Medications are quite a big one, of people being dosed up to the eyeballs on the assumption they have some aberrant behaviour, when actually sometimes nursing staff are short-staffed and it's a bit of an easy get-out, maybe alleged to give some people living with dementia drugs for this purpose. I'm saying nothing, don't shoot the messenger, but if that were the case, that would clearly be an abuse of human rights. And the Equality Act ties in with the human rights legislation. You cannot have any policy, process or procedure which acts to the detriment of any protected group, and people with dementia are a protected group under disability as per Equality Act 2010 regulations. We've been here before, of course. The Disability Discrimination Act 1995 has amended under Tory government, made it advisable for goods and services to be disabled friendly, and this came out last year. So, plus ça change yet about that. But anyway, in Scotland, there are some rights, and I strongly urge you to look them up. And Owen Oldfather and people, Jeanette Maitland and all part of the Jeff Hangans, all part of the Scottish Axis, will be telling Amy Dalrymple, who will be telling about the Scottish policy about how they're really forging ahead with the rights-based advocacy. So, my conclusions are, really you'll be able to predict them, won't you? That I don't think this is a choice between choice and budgets, between budgets and rights, pardon the pun. It's clearly unacceptable to have personal budgets imposed on groups, because that is a bit of a peace sign against the idea of choice, making them compulsory. But I think the general trend is not to have upfront money. I think it is difficult to implement given the current spending priorities of current governments. And so I think budgets are things which are there, lurking in the background, have worked extremely well for some people, have not worked so well for other people, and I think it would be beneficial if more people knew about them. As for human rights, well, I don't feel despondent about this really. Human Rights Act will be remarketed like the national minimum wage was recently to the national living wage. It'll get remarketed as a Bill of Rights, but the legal underpinnings will probably be there, such as the European Convention on Human Rights. Why do I say that? Because they unwind the legality of it through the Northern Ireland or Scottish agreements would be colossal. It won't even go there. And we, of course, are all subject to the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Now, I quite like the idea of human rights. As a bit of a spectator, because I think I've never been a big fan of dementia-friendly communities. Don't ask me why I've written about it. And third plug, I don't need to say. But the idea is that these communities should be inclusive to all, accessible to all, could be mainstream services. It doesn't logically make sense to have dementia-friendly communities when we're simultaneously arguing that people should not be defined by the condition. And actually, as it happens, the comorbidities, being medical for a second, are quite big for dementia. So somebody is rarely likely to have dementia on their own. So I'm a big advocate of human rights. They have to be, like the rest of the law, enforceable. But there are actually people with dementia some power, which you can argue do exist for budgets too. But I think it takes the emphasis away for dementia-friendly communities, which, as I said before, is prone to victimhood a bit too much for me and others. So I'll leave it there, and I hope it's been a useful introduction to this huge area. Thank you. So, that was it.